Now I'd like to introduce Megan Arthur, who will introduce our guest tonight. Thank you. Good evening. I have the pleasure of introducing Kathryn Davis to you all tonight. To compose a memoir is to attempt to stitch together elements of oneself to make a narrative out of experience. For Kathryn Davis, those elements are themselves texts. Her memoir and her most recent work, Aurelia, is a meditation composed of texts, creating for the reader a masterful library of classical literature associatively stitched together with other non-literary texts, TV shows, fairy tales, compositions. It would be a mistake, though, to say that Davis's recollections are made up of texts. The meat of the memoir is composed of what exists between the reader and the text, the mind and the story, between ghostly you and the ghostly artist, in ghostly communion in that non-existent place between words, images, notes. It is this place of entering that the narrator focuses on, this miraculous ability that we as readers have to enter the liminal space of the imagination of someone else's narrative. To Davis, the imagination is material. The mind of the reader, the thinker, the dreamer is able to slip through a hole in the fabric of the known world and down the moist gullet of the universe. In Aurelia, narrative time can shift within a sentence, and dreams, memories, moments, moths, and ghosts intersperse to recreate that interstitial space between the mind and reality. I wish sometimes to be less an imagination and more a person, Davis recalls writing at a younger age. But perhaps, her book asks us to consider, an understanding of one's own experience can be found in that elsewhere, that multi-directional bardo between memory, where memory is the stitch, the traveler, the ship crossing between past and present, between text and self. Perhaps we are all filled with doors. This memoir from a celebrated novelist reveals a writer who has mastered her craft and who acknowledges that reading, creating, and remembering are acts as mystical, as metaphysical as they are intellectual. In addition to Aurelia, which won the Vermont Book Award for creative nonfiction, Kathryn Davis is the author of 8 novels. She has received the Kafka Prize for fiction by an American woman, as well as the Morton Dauwen Zabel Award and the Katherine Anne Porter Award from the American Academy of Arts and Letters. She is also the recipient of a Guggenheim Fellowship and a winner of the Lannan Foundation Literary Award. She is the senior fiction writer on the faculty of the writing program at Washington University, and we are so lucky to have her here tonight. Please give a warm welcome to Kathryn Davis.
Thank you. Hi, wait a minute, I have to take this out of my pocket. Can you all hear me? Okay. Thank you so much for inviting me here. Everybody who had anything to do with that. I am very happy to be here. This is a wonderful place. You all know that, but I didn't know it before. So I am going to read 2 things. I'm going to read a chapter from Aurelia, and I'm also going to do something I almost never do. I'm going to sing. No. I'm going to read what I believe is the first chapter of a new book, and I'm going to just explain a little bit what that is, because I don't want to do it in between. I felt like the chapter I picked from Aurelia, if I just pause briefly and launch into the new work, will be more fluid than if I stop and explain. So this new work is, I'm conceiving of it as an autobiography, but a very different kind of autobiography, just as my memoir is a different kind of memoir. And it's sort of beginning, really, as you'll see, at the very beginning, and really the beginning. And the chapter I have right now is Fata Nix, which I got from a manuscript by a really wonderful Italian writer, Cristina Campo, who referred to herself as Fata Nix, which turns out to mean snow fairy in Latin. So I just like the way Fata Nix sounds. I may not keep that. So that's what I'm going to do, so you know. Vigilance. It began as a joke. My husband was dying. He had only so much time left, how much we didn't know. His spirits were generally good, and the shingles virus that made his last days miserable had yet to emerge from its hiding place deep in his body, meaning we could still share the same bed and spend our mornings side by side, drinking coffee and looking at the local paper, all 10 pages of it. Personal details about your private life are made public today, my husband said, reading the horoscope. Meanwhile, you need more sleep. The bedroom has 4 large windows facing east, direction of the rising sun, the waxing moon, rabbit, air, redemption. The way the house is situated on a small rise above the street, what you see out the bedroom windows are the branches of locust trees framing pieces of sky shaped like jigsaw puzzle pieces, the kind I had as a girl, where some pieces are shaped like things, a horn, a bicycle wheel, a bird, a shoe. My favorite showed a scene with birds standing one-legged in a marsh at sunset, the sun sending all sorts of colors across the black water. It made no sense for a high-heeled shoe to be there. This is what I was thinking while my dying husband read me my horoscope. And the wind, and the drops of rain like bullets. Gross morn, the final pitch, a sheer wall of scree, and there it was at the foot of the wall, dropped on the talus, a red high-heeled shoe. It hardly makes sense to think about how it got there, or how I did for that matter. I was a girl who constructed forts out of bed sheets in the living room. That was as close as I came to a tent. And my idea of mountains came from a movie I saw on our tiny black and white television screen about men climbing the Matterhorn. The Matterhorn had a pointed top exactly like the mountains we were taught to draw in school. It shook you off like lice, an old woman pointed out to the climbers after the avalanche chased them back down to the village. It was at about this time that my friend Alex and his wife bought a house in The Hague, a charming brick row house with a balcony and chimney pots. And when I showed my husband the picture, he said it made him sad that after all the money and work we'd put into our house, and he enumerated bookshelves, stone walls, bookshelves, walls, shelves, shelves. For over the years, we'd come to own many books we were loath to part with. Most recently, my husband's complete collection of Rex Stout mysteries, a talismanic obsession that had grown in tandem with the cancer. After all that, my husband said, not to mention the tortured beech out front, a baby when we planted it, and just think of it now, casting its tortuous shadow far and wide across the lawn. How could he dream of leaving? He stared at me intently, the dark brown of his irises more transparent, like he was letting me see inside his head. Inside my husband's head was an idea, and the idea had its origins in his background as an ecological economist. Limitless growth is bad. Processes that involve the transfer or conversion of energy are irreversible. Ruth says the city's infrastructure is in worse shape than I am, my husband went on to say. Though by this time he'd stopped joining me on the daily dog walk in Hubbard Park, until recently he'd managed to maintain the ritual by taking a shortcut that avoided the steep uphill climb through a lichen-shrouded ravine. We would find him sitting in the sun on a table in the 7 fireplaces, of which I've never been able to count more than 5, picnic area, the dogs having raced ahead of us, sitting at his feet, staring up at him, our Lucy and Susan's Riley, and Betty's Walnut and Ruth's little Maya. It was simple enough to conflate Ruth's view of our sewer system with the occult data on the discs routinely handed to us by the good-natured medical personnel whose job it was to keep track of the story unfolding inside my husband's organs. There was a narrative involved that didn't follow conventional rules, unlike those governing Rex Stout. Just as the work being done on the sewer system, the road torn up every day and the rubble dumped back in at night, seemed like the project of insane elves. But you don't have to leave the house, I said. You could haunt it. The imperative to be vigilant is always there. It's only that there are times in the life of a person or the world when it seems more crucial, just as there are limits to what vigilance can achieve. At some point during the election year of 1956, my father gave me a beautiful glossy sticker that said, "I like Ike." I affixed it to the center of the top drawer of my maple dresser, knowing as I did so that in our family, to put a sticker on a piece of furniture was akin to putting a sticker on my little sister. "I can't believe you did that," my mother said. Shortly thereafter, she gave me a beautiful glossy sticker that said, "Madly for Adley." I was 10 years old. I had written a get well card to Eisenhower a year earlier when he had a heart attack. And to my amazement, I'd gotten a thank you card back that my best friend Peggy's older brother Marto said hadn't actually been signed by Mamie Eisenhower. "That's just printed on," Marto said. I still have the maple dresser and the maple bed. The bed has tooth marks along the headboard where I chewed on it when I couldn't sleep. In 1956, my job was to keep vigil over the night sky for the plane that was carrying the bomb that was going to turn us all to bone and then to ash and then to nothing. The dresser sat across from the bed and next to the console radio, set to 1190 AM, whoa, whoa, Fort Wayne, Indiana, the voice of 1,000 main streets that somehow managed to be everywhere all at once, all night long. My job was to listen to the radio whenever I heard a siren, making sure the world wasn't about to end. For many years, the 2 stickers coexisted on the dresser drawer, Ike in the center and Adlai to the left. At night, while I kept vigil, they were companions to me, their twin presence reassuring the eyes of a single deity, lit by the light of the 23 trolley as it made its way up and down Germantown Avenue. Nowadays, the dresser is on the 3rd floor in my daughter's old bedroom, a place where things get put on their way to the yard sale. Considering its age, the dresser's overall finish is in good shape, the top drawer noticeably scuffed in the area between the drawer pulls, where at some point I scraped off the stickers. What was I thinking? I no longer needed them? By the time I was the girl in the tent, in the rain, at the foot of Gross Morn, I had traded vigilance for romance. I had done some traveling, yes, but always to places where a person stayed in a building of some kind and slept in a bed, even if on a damp Greek mattress. In the house where I grew up, furniture was coin of the realm. All our furniture had names: highboy, bachelor chest, pie crust table. I had never courted danger, whereas my old boyfriend was scornful of trail markers, like the hero of The Challenge, the 1938 movie about the first ascent of the Matterhorn that I'd watched sitting in the wing chair in the family living room on Wooddale Road. He always preferred to take the impossible route to the summit and to execute the endeavor even if it was doomed with style. I never imagined myself atop a mountain in Newfoundland, but then I didn't imagine myself in bed with a dying husband either. In the Bardo, narrative seems to happen, but doesn't. You think you are making a tuna sandwich. You think you are cutting the tuna sandwich into little squares to tempt your dying husband's appetite. We're born into the life bardo, and when we begin to die, we're in the dying bardo. And after that, we're in the death bardo, at which point we make our transition back via rebirth into the birth bardo, having experienced delight in the meeting between sperm and ovum, and from that state of bliss, fainting into unconsciousness, and as time passes, coming to maturity in the womb until finally, emerging from the womb and opening our eyes, we will have turned into a puppy or something and are back once again in the life bardo. The idea is that you are not supposed to encourage a dead person to stay with you. You are not supposed to encourage a haunting, to cause someone you love to get stuck here in this most insufferable of the bardos. Oh, you, with your mind far away, thinking that death will not come, entranced by the pointless activities of this life. If you were to return empty-handed now, would not your life's purpose have been utterly confused? So the Lama is instructed to address the deceased person in the Tibetan Book of the Dead, urging him to move on. Oh, name of deceased, listen carefully. Oh, Eric, listen carefully. Afterward, I found the bookmark he left in the Rex Stout mystery. Midway through the book, the sentence, "The bag slipped from her hand to the floor and her face went white and stiff," at the top of the page. I thought of Eric's dark brown eyes moving across the page and then growing tired. The vitreous humor, and then the road bent left. I had seen people turn pale before, but I had never seen blood leave skin so thoroughly and so fast, the book went on to say. I dreamed I was picking red flowers. To the right, a large tree of some kind, beginning to leaf out, one gray asbestos wall of the general store visible behind it. We had just met. By summer, the green Valvoline advertisement no longer in view. The eyes staring fixedly without blinking. The scaling of the mountain of the elements. Place the wrist at the point between the eyebrows. The arm so thin as to be a line, and then it was gone. So now, Fata Nix. And it's not meant to come after that, but I think it has a certain flow here. Your trials are with you, trials being without a specific moment of arrival. I was born at 6 o'clock in the morning on the 13th day of November in this year of our Lord, 1946. Before that, sparklers, the kind you shouldn't use because they'll put your eye out. Before sparklers, lightning bugs, galaxies. The doctor held me aloft. From my first moment in this world, my feet pointed in the same direction, sideways, like an Egyptian. I've been told things, but some things I remember. I seem to remember a canopic jar, a little green hill, a pink and black dog nose looming in front of my face, and there being nothing better to do with it, taking it in my mouth, like biting but without teeth. The sensation of a wet nose slipping between gums into the sucking cavern of my mouth, the location of deepest pleasure, while a mother or father, both beings of less consequence at that moment than the dog, pushed me along in my tailor tot. As if the place you think you start is ever the right one. The prince had the shoe, and what he had to do was find the foot that went into it. There was only one foot like this in the whole gigantic universe. I think possibly that part of the story hasn't been made clear. Out the window, ever-fidgeting branches shot through with clouds. And really, all you have to go on is what you've been told. The duration of labor was 6 hours, the birth breech. My mother was given a drug cocktail designed to produce something she described in our baby's first 7 years as Dämmerschlaf, or twilight sleep, meaning she had no memory whatever of the moment I entered this earthly realm. We were in the Pennsylvania Lying-in Hospital at the intersection of 8th and Spruce, across Washington Square from J.B. Lippincott and Company. My last 2 years of high school, I had a summer job there. The first summer, filing invoices and feeling sorry for the authors whose accounts were in the red. The second, proofreading Bibles, where red print was used to indicate words spoken by Jesus. During lunch break, I'd sit on a bench at the edge of the square, occasionally playing honeymoon bridge with my high school crush, who had a summer job in a nearby ice cream cone factory, where the temperature often was over 100 degrees Fahrenheit. Otherwise, I'd sit by myself. Looking across the square at the building I'd sailed through curtains of morphine and scopolamine to be born in, though I had no idea that's what the building was. On and on, always on and on, away from you, parted by a life parting, going from one another 10,000 li, each in a different corner of the world. Later, I tried to find it, the place of entry. I dreamed about it often. So often, I was sure I would recognize it. Yet when you get right down to it, there's nothing to distinguish these places. After I got born, my mother and I received a lot of cards. She began by taping them into a large pink scrapbook with a picture on the cover of the 3 little pigs, one carrying a pitchfork of straw and a red trumpet, one a bale of sticks and a black banjo, one a hod filled with bricks. The message was clear. If you didn't want your house to fall down around you, you'd better not become a musician. Many cards had kittens on them and referred to me as kitten, a word I loved and still love for the forceful sound of ten there at the end. Because you were such a sweet, soft little kitten, one card said, showing a kitten sitting inside a straw hat. How did they get to the Pennsylvania Lying-in Hospital, my mother and father? They had a car, they drove. It was November, the middle of the night. The weather was possibly bad. No one ever talked about this part of the story. They only would have talked about it if something had gone wrong. What route did they take? East River Drive? When I was an art student, I rode at insane speeds along that narrow, sinuous road on the back of a boyfriend's motorcycle, never knowing as I gripped his ribcage, we were on the very brink of the death bardo, a hair's breadth from the place of conception. For my mother and father, the place of conception had been established 9 months before that drive to the hospital, Valentine's Day Eve, to be exact. I'm thinking they would have been in the mahogany four-poster, erotically entangled under white bed sheets ironed by my mother, a compulsive ironer. Or maybe it being Valentine's Day Eve, they were on the living room sofa, inebriated, throwing caution to the winds. 2 martini glasses, olive pits, cigarette butts, Triscuits. My parents always loved Triscuits. A vase of flowers. I can't remember what flowers my mother liked best, though she put the single bird of paradise I gave her one Mother's Day, having spent on it what felt like a small fortune, in her favorite tall vase in the place of honor atop the piano. Meanwhile, the intermediate being, the one that was not yet me, was experiencing feelings of lust for its father and hatred for its mother. It thought it was cold, that there was wind, rain, clouds, and fog, that sound of a huge clamoring crowd. Mistaking the womb for one of 10 types of shelter, it went in. At the time, my parents lived in a handsome graystone apartment building at 261 West Walnut Lane. In one of the photographs from that period, they're sitting on the sofa side by side, fully clothed, my mother's martini glass half empty, my father's half full. Does any first world human living today wish they could have watched the sex their parents had that brought them into being? In other parts of the world, of course, the primal scene is no big deal. And here too, before houses developed multiple rooms and the rooms developed doors, but for my parents, this would have been what we now call mid-century. By the time the moment of conception arrived, they had been married 6 years. Another indeterminate being had arrived before me and departed prematurely. Possibly it had come back to try again. This can happen. In any case, my parents' initial bond was powerful and erotic. They kept at it, undaunted by miscarriage. 261 West Walnut Lane. Looking at the building on Google Maps, I am filled with a longing to go inside. Its flat, gray face exerting the attraction indifference exerts. 2 big shrubs obscure the entrance, but when I scroll across the scrubs, I can see the pair of doors I no doubt went through many times in the course of my initial 2 years as a human being. At first in my mother's arms, later in the tailor tot, bumping up and down the entry steps. By then, I was so much bigger than I'd been to start, a massive accumulation of cells surmounted by a brain stem. I don't think it's possible to remember those doors. Certainly the shrubs weren't there, nor was the street lined as it is on Google Maps with the kinds of cars people drive nowadays, cars with lots of chrome and angry-looking faces. I don't think it's possible to remember anything about West Walnut Lane, aside from the dog nose, a moist thing, endlessly active. And as for the indeterminate being, it had been waiting in the wings, looking for a pair of copulating bodies, human, with pleasing dispositions, to ensure good rebirth in the human realm. For this to happen, the bodies had to have been filled with sexual desire for one another. They also had to have been well-fed and free of diseases that would make the vagina look like a camel's mouth or a tree with many roots, like a plowhead, a cane stalk, hair on barley. Where did the indeterminate being come from? How did it get there? Someone must have died, but who? How did the thing that was not yet a being recognize human appetite? I picture it something like the paper doll in Andersen's fairy tale about the tin soldier, a little dancer in a dress of the lightest gauze with a dainty blue ribbon over its shoulders, daintily making its way down the corridor of the vagina, impelled onward by the great pushing nose of the penis. Onward, onward, and then the sperm entered the egg and voila, there it was, there was me. The transaction, if that's what you'd call it, no matter it may have started with the sweetest of kisses, was anything but romantic. Later came the bedspread crocheted by my father's mother, the wet blanket Southern Baptist grandmother we called Nana, who wouldn't let us play cards on Sunday. Later came the left-hand drawer of my mother's mahogany vanity table with the pink case inside containing the diaphragm she evidently eschewed the use of Valentine's Day Eve, 1946. Later came my father's mahogany dresser, and atop it his sterling silver brush and comb set, the little oval box of tooled leather with a pair of gold cufflinks inside, a New York City subway token, good for one fare, a mother-of-pearl collar button, and the minuscule sharpshooter pin that is the only thing he brought home with him from the war. A disinterested soldier at best, my father spent the war in Camp Crowder, Missouri, where it's possible he may have run into the cartoonist who drew Beetle Bailey, which will give you some idea of what the camp was like. His letters to my mother describe dourly the monotony of peeling potatoes. Hers to him exhort him to think big, as, for example, Officers Candidate School. He came home from the war a private, handsome, unapologetic, unscarred by the brutality of warfare. It was never a part of him, my father. He'd never thought he'd spend 2 years of his life living in Missouri. Camp Crowder is in the southwestern part of the state, the gateway to the Ozarks, whereas St. Louis, where I spend every spring teaching, is on the eastern border, the gateway to the west. The points of intersection are everywhere. You can see them spangled alive in all the little receptacles I've collected over the years, starting with the oval leather box containing the very things my father put into it more than 40 years ago, and ending with a perfectly round milk glass jar into which I put the lock of hair I cut from my husband's head minutes after he died. The brilliant dot of light emitted by a cufflink, the brilliant dot of light emitted by a brass door pull, the brightly spangled surface of all the gleaming mahogany bedroom furniture now spread to the four winds, a camp in Vermont, a storage unit in upstate New York, a cousin's house in Minnesota. As if the kind of activity that produces a bedroom, those things you touch that emit a spark, give you a shock, can be used to summon an entire life into being. Enter the womb. Previously, having been one thing, you will now be another. So consequently, you will find yourself in a pigsty, or an anthill, or a wormhole, or a dog kennel, or a room filled with mahogany furniture. The rain, the blackness, the hurricanes, the thunderous sound. There is no way back. I feel like I should answer. Well, I'm not answering questions now. Tomorrow, okay. Oh, wait a minute. I'm attached here. There.
Thank you, Kathryn, so much for all of your
You're great.
Oh, thank you.
No, that was amazing. Buy books, come tomorrow, eat pizza, and have a discussion with Kathryn at noon here. And thank you all for coming.